Well, good evening, everyone. It's a beautiful Friday night in summery Wells. I know it's not officially summer yet. However, the unofficial start to summer has begun. That's Memorial Day weekend. So here I am, and I'm trying to call up my page on my iPad so I can see what's going on, and there I am. Oop, now I need to get rid of my voice on my iPad. So, nice to have you with us, Mary and Sheila. Happy Friday to you both. I hope you've got some stamping plans in your future. My husband put the AC in downstairs because we're about to have a heat wave in Wells, and so I plan on making good use of it and keeping my stamp room door open so nice and cool this weekend. But tonight I wanted to show a Father's Day card, and I'm going to show kind of three different versions. And I posted this on Thursday, my three different versions. But you know, sometimes we are at different places in our stamping. Sometimes people are just starting out, and it can be very frustrating when all they see is a finished product like this. That has lots of layers and things going on and die cuts. When you're just starting out, you have, if you're lucky, stamps, ink, and paper. And so I want to start with showing stamps, ink, and paper. I'm going to be using the Handsomely Suited set tonight. For the third card, I will also be using the coordinating suit and tie dies. And I will also be using the stitched rectangle dies. Which is totally just, optional. Yeah, it's just a little bit of something to the card. But what I want to start with is just a very simple 2 colors of cardstock. Oh, I don't want that piece. And let's see. So I'm using Smoky Slate and Pacific Point. Hi, Linda. Nice to have you with us tonight. We're going to be using black StazOn ink because I'm going to be adding a little bit of watercoloring to this. Just a little bit. Because remember, if I'm a beginner stamper, I only have probably stamps, ink, and paper. I might not even have Smoky Slate, but let's just argue for a moment that a gray is one of the colors that I have. I'm going to start on this, and because I want to stamp my greeting in the center, I am going to find the center. Now I know that this is 4 1/4 inches long, so I'm going to just put this on my grid sheet. Any ruled paper would do as well. I'm going to get the Have a Happy Father's Day Handsome stamp out of the set. And ink that up. Of course, you could also ink this up in a gray. Because I'm watercoloring, I really do want to use my StazOn. And 2 1/8 inches. So if I marked 2 1/8, that's about the halfway point of this card. So that's about right here. So I want the center of my Father's Day to kind of come in there. And this is such a bad angle when I'm shooting video. Hi, Sylvia. Oh, so I didn't get it straight, but I'm going to try it one more time, and we'll just move on if I don't get it from here. But my camera is in the way, so it makes it very difficult to actually see what I'm doing. And my voice probably gets pretty loud because I'm right near my phone. All right, it's crooked, but it's okay because we're going to be stepping it up, and I'll get a better shot at it in a little bit anyway. So there we have our sentiment. And I want to stamp my bow, 1 on the bottom, and I'm going to stamp 1 on the top, just like that. Now while I have my ink here, I'm going to there's a protective cover that comes with a StazOn, and you really want to keep that on that as much as possible, just because the StazOn tends to dry out very quickly. I'm not going to wash my ink, my stamp pad just yet because I'm going to be using it again. So to color it, I'm going to bring in my Smoky Slate ink pad, and this is one of the old style ink pads. I haven't switched this one over yet. I'm slowly but surely getting all of them. I think I have 2 complete sets of new pads plus the in colors, but I have my old ones that are not quite switched over yet. So I still have my basic tones and my regal tones. I'm just gonna, that's a little wet, so I'm just gonna pick that up here, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of color to my bow ties. And I really want to concentrate my color most on these folds and where you know, the edges of the bow tie are. So that's usually what I end up coloring first, because that will have the strongest concentration of ink. And then as I start to run out of ink on that, I'm just filling in the rest, and it creates the natural highlights. There's one. This water painter's pretty juicy. And here's another. Now I think I've showed you before, but another way to pick up ink is, instead of squeezing your ink pad together, is to just take a clear block and smoosh it onto the stamp pad and pick the ink up from there. But because I have my blocks already in use right now, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to go grab another one. So pretty easy coloring it in. Just a very subtle color. And to clean your brushes, just wipe it until it runs clean. You can put it away. So the next thing I would want to do is just mount this on a piece of a different color cardstock, just to make it, you know, pop a little bit. So that's why we have, that's the wrong measurement. There we go. So you have that. And then we, of course, need a card base, and I'm going to use the Smoky Slate card base because, again, a beginner stamper probably only has very few colors, at least to start out. Now, I could just mount this like this and call it a day. There's a card. But that background is really quite plain to me. So if you wanted to step it up, now some people are those that like it a little bit cleaner and simpler, and that's fine. If you wanted to step it up a little bit, you can create a background just by repeatedly stamping your bow tie in the background. Now, I wouldn't start the same way that I did here. I'd want to stagger them a little bit. Sometimes if things are too lined up, it's a little distracting. And really in the center here, it's going to be covered up. So, you know, I don't have to worry too much about how well that's stamping. You can angle these. They don't have to go straight across the page. You can do whatever you want. But there's now just a background. It's not quite as plain. And I put my piece over it. And that's a very simple but nice card to give to someone. And let's face it, guys don't generally like all the bling anyway, so clean and simple generally works for them. Now, if I wanted to take this up a little bit, well, then what I can do is I can add some bow ties. I have some Designer Series paper here, which is it might be something that a beginner stamper buys, or someone who's just a little bit further down the track, because it's a pretty great value. You get nice coordinating paper, you've got lots of colors, an easy pattern that you don't have to really work for. So we're going to take my bow again, and I'm going to stamp on these pieces, and I'm actually angling it on here so that the stripes aren't parallel or perpendicular to how the bow tie is on the card. And I can fussy cut this out. So again, a beginner stamper probably is working on building her inks, his or her inks and paper collection first, and may not be able to have the big shot or the dies. So you can cut those out, by hand. Now, I'm not going to do that, only because I don't want to take the time to do that. This one has been die cut. So I have a couple die cut already. So you know what? Let's go ahead and let's fussy cut, because fussy cutting isn't all that hard. And especially if you don't have a lot to cut out. And what's nice about these bow ties is they don't have a lot of, a lot of curves, a lot of ins and outs where you have to change the angle of your scissors. It's a pretty easy cut. And I'm cutting just outside the lines a little bit. I'm trying to stay smooth in my cutting, not a lot of starts and stops. And when you're cutting, the best method for cutting is to turn your paper and not your scissors. So there's one little bow tie. And here's the other. I hadn't really planned on doing this, but why not? This designer series paper, let me just show you for a real quick second, is part of that Handsomely Suited suite. This is retiring at the end of June. It's called Well Suited Designer Series paper, and the prints are fantastic for ties in this, for ties and shirts. They really scaled it down nicely. This looks really great as a men's suit. So the papers are really very nice, and not just masculine. I mean, let's face it, men do wear floral ties as well, but you can make that for women's stuff too. All right, so let's see. Let's get back to cutting here. All right, I'm almost done. There's one more edge to do. All right, so I have that. Let me move my scraps. I take my card back here, and all I have to do is pop those up on the top of this. And I can put it down with regular adhesive, or I could use dimensionals. But let's say we've been stamping for a while and we have all the toys. Let's show you what that card looks like from start to finish. So I will need a piece of smoky slate cardstock. I'll need a card of that. And so when I say I'm going to start from scratch, it includes cutting the card base here. So here I have a piece of, it's an odd size, I'd already cut into it. I want it 5.5 inches. It's already 8.5 in the other dimension, and I want to score it at 4.25. And I'll just fold that. Take my little bone folder and get a nice sharp crease. So I have my base. I could go ahead and stamp my bow ties, but in that designer series paper is this lovely paisley print. And I thought that would look really nice in the background. I'm going to cut that 1/4 of an inch smaller in each direction. So 5 1/4 by 4 inches. That's already 4 inches wide. And I will adhere that with my Stampin' Seal. There we go. Now I'm going to actually start over with my sentiment, and I've got a piece of smoky slate that's a slightly different dimension, because I'm going to, if you look at the detail here, let me see if I can hold it up closer enough so you can see there's stitching around here, which really does add a nice little bit here. So to get that stitching, we need our stitched rectangles. So I'm going to use a stitched rectangle die. And so I just cut a piece that's a little bit bigger than this. I'm going to be using my Stampin' Cut and Emboss Mini. So I wanted to make it fairly small. I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to ink up my Have a Happy Father's Day Handsome. And I'm going to probably move this almost out of the camera. You know what? Maybe I can bend this a little bit so we can have the best of both worlds here. That's not bad. I'm going to take it on this Friday evening. My sample's pretty good. My sample's nice and straight. But here's the beauty of what I'm doing with this card. There's so many angles on it that the eye is a little bit deceived on what's straight and what's not anyway. So I have my Happy Father's Day. I am actually going to be using the bow ties that I cut out. I even have, you know, a different one if I wanted that one. So I don't need to stamp above and below, but I do need to cut this out. And again, if I wanted to die cut my bows, I have the dies. So we need a number 1 plate, one of the number 2s. I'm going to put my rectangle on here and center it as best I can. Sometimes it just works if I hold it up first. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to place it on here on a little bit of an angle. It can't be much of an angle, only because, you know, the way the die is, it takes up most of it anyway. But just a little bit of an angle helps it go through the machine a little bit. Ooh, I've got my handle on the wrong side. I'm going to flip this around if you don't mind, so I can run this through a little bit easier. Oh, I ran it through and okay. It definitely has a harder time with the very square dies. So the big Stampin' Cut and Emboss often works quite a bit better, which it's going to, because my plate is a little warped. It's a little old. I flipped it over. Maybe it'll go through this way. And maybe it won't. Really just does not like the square dies or rectangular dies. So that's all right. I've got my big one here. So let's go ahead and get out my number 1, my number 2, my number 3. My new plates are coming this week. I'm so glad. These are just so used. I can't even see what I'm doing through them anymore. All right, so now that I have it on here, I can definitely put it at more of an angle. I'll run this through. So much better. Just, it's got more room to play with. And so when you take, and if you plan it right, I didn't have this centered when I stamped, so this is not a frame, but I could have made this a frame if I had completely centered it. So here we have this piece. I'm going to take my bows and I'm going to use a bit of the edges of these mini dimensionals here. Pop up the backs. Never need to waste all this around the edge, especially on these mini dimensionals. They actually have quite a bit of edging around it, very thick. So you can get a lot of use there. Now it's a matter of which one's on the top, which one's on the bottom. I think I like it better this way. Looks pretty centered. That looks pretty centered. There I have those two pieces. Now I'm going to bring out two pieces of cardstock that are the same measurement. These happen to be 2 5/8 by 4 1/4. One is basic white and one is Pacific Point. And I will just adhere this to my card. I start with the top layer first and then figure out what the angle is that I want. So I can go this way, I can go this way. Doesn't really matter which way. You just have to pick one. One color is going to go one way, one color will go the other way. And I just usually make sure that, you know, it's kind of doing the same thing on the top as it is on the bottom. Doesn't have to be exact. And then I put a little more adhesive on, and then I take my Pacific Point and I go the other way. So it's peeking out top and bottom. And again, I want to make sure it's sort of doing the same thing on the top as it's doing on the bottom. You just play until you get it the way you want it. So what I'm looking at right here is looking at this gray piece. It's about even with the top of the edge of the blue, and same thing down here. So that looks pretty good to me. And then I just adhere this to my card. So here's the trick. Now you got to make sure that your focal layer, the one that has the greeting on it, that is straight. So you have to kind of ignore the white and the blue right now and just really focus on this top layer. And so there you have the card. Now, you can't, it's a light color inside, but I still don't like to leave it white. Only because, I mean, I don't like to leave it whatever color that is, the smoky slate. So I'm going to get out a piece of basic white cardstock and make a layer for the inside. So here's a scrap that I have. And this is, of course, where the mushy note would come into play that you're going to write to the dad. My father is no longer living, so this one's going to my husband. Well, I guess you might be getting two because I made, of course, this one as well, but or I'll be giving these cards away at some point. You know what? I could send one of these out to one of you. That's what I'm going to do. All right. So there's my inside layer. And hey, why don't why don't we take one of these leftover die cut bows and put that right in here. You could center it if you wanted it to be centered. I didn't think about that before I laid it down. But there is my card.